customer! Holy hell, it's a miracle. You guys better not screw this up. Dead Rising. A game series created by Capcom many years ago. And about 3 years ago, I made a video talking about the death of Dead Rising. It's a video that I thoroughly enjoyed, but considering that there's a lot more to go into discussion about the series that led up to the catastrophic death of the series, I figured remake the video of sorts, and do more of a deeper dive into the series. So come with me, my friends, as we go through a video series talking about the origin and eventual death of Dead Rising. I'm MangaKamen, and I guess if you could count the kind of videos I make, I sometimes cover wars, I guess? Just so I don't have to worry about overusing a joke, here it is.
Willamette, Colorado.
Willamette.
To start off, we need to make our journey all the way back to 2004, 2 decades ago. Long before the public had an inkling of what Dead Rising was, Capcom was at hard work creating a new game engine, known as the MT Framework Engine, alongside a rather beloved game at the time, Shadow of Rome. For those unfamiliar with the title, it was a third-person action-adventure game that was set in ancient Rome, where you could use various weapons and chariots to fight in the Colosseum. And when the game launched in early 2005, development of its sequel was in the works. Now you may be wondering why I'm even bringing up this totally random game in a video about Dead Rising. The answer is simple. Shadow of Rome failed in the sales. And Keiji Inafune, producer of the Mega Man series, saw the numbers and decided to cancel the planned sequel to Shadow of Rome. However, the basis for the game, along with its mechanics, were being recycled into Project Snatcher. No, not that Snatcher made by Kojima. And for those who don't know, Snatcher was a working title for Dead Rising, but it's still referenced within the final product. Most notably the name of the Willamette newspaper, Snatcher Journal. Throughout the development, Shadow of Rome's assets were used as placeholders for Dead Rising, including an enemy that used the head, hair, and hands of a character from Shadow of Rome, named Sextus. Yes, there is a character named Sextus. And yes, I find that funny. Don't blame me, alright. I'm a grown man with the mentality of an 18-year-old college student high on the dankest of ganja. Now, it wouldn't be until E3 of 2005 that Dead Rising would be first released to the public. As you can see, there are a lot of differences between this and the final project. That's to be expected since it was a prototype stage of development. The player character, who would be known as Frank West, was completely different, though there were some elements that would be carried over, such as the camera or that he wouldn't be Hollywood pretty, which was the goal as stated by Inafune at the time of the development. You'll also notice in the E3 footage that there's a lot of repeats of zombies. Just look at them all. If I didn't know any better, I'd say this was an episode of Star Trek. Those poor yellow shirts. The goal at the time was to get as many zombies as you can squeeze onto a game screen. And we also saw the beginnings of the Survivor escort missions as well, but we'll get back to that. Another thing to notice is that the setting of the game is inside of a mall, which, if you know anything about the zombie genre, it's a direct inspiration from the Monroeville Mall that was used in Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And it makes sense, a mall would be the best place to hunker down in a zombie apocalypse. And for people who love the good old zombie flick, being the average Joe mowing down zombies with baseball bats, golf clubs, and a working Mega Buster is a dream come true for any zombie fan. Even to the point where there was a disclaimer slapped on the cover of the game that basically points out the similarities between Dawn of the Dead and Dead Rising. Although I should point out in 2008, the producer of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, Richard Rubinstein, did try to file a lawsuit against Capcom, with such gems of evidence for the lawsuit such as, both works are set in a bi-level shopping mall. Both works use music in the mall for comedic effect. Both works are a parody of rampant consumerism. And most damning of all, many of the zombies wear plaid shirts. Luckily, when the lawsuit was brought before an actual judge, the case was thrown out. This was your totally useless video game fact of the day. How's it feel to have 2 minutes of your time wasted? I could waste more if you'd like. Like this one time that,
Oh no.
Back back to the actual design work, there were even talks about how the developers actually had to visit malls in America so they get a feel for what they were like, since the game is supposed to take place in the fictional town of Willamette, set in Colorado. This was because Dead Rising was purposely designed to appeal to the Western game market. In 2005's Tokyo Game Show, there was an actual demo which would reflect more of the finished product, with some notable changes like how Frank West, while still resembling his previous E3 demo appearance, looked a lot better, though he still needed a little more time in the Capcom oven before he became the protagonist that we all loved, and then subsequently hate.
Fist bump.
Now, there are a lot of builds and trials that were produced by Capcom between 2005 and the game's release, so I won't go through them all, but if you're interested, there is a website that did give a lot of interesting screenshots and rips from the games, and even include what the last preview disc looked like before the game was actually released. Wouldn't expect anything different from you, Crapcom. And while we touched on the protagonist's design a tad bit, I think that it should also be noted that Frank West himself in this part had a lot more changes made to him that would eventually get people hooked into the series. As shown before in an interview, Keiji Inafune's goal for Frank West was to go against the norm with video game protagonists, especially for Japanese-based games. How'd they look? And I quote, "beautiful, shiny, and young."
Nailed it, I know, thank you. Moving on.
That's not even funny, man.
He didn't want someone who was super cool like that. Capcom wanted to make a rough, tough character that was gritty for the Western audience. Frank was supposed to be an unremarkable man who was stuck in a horrifying experience, with all the grime and imperfections that a real person might have, and the lack of skill that the average person would possess. Well, aside from some instances. In fact, let's take a look at some other protagonists from another zombie-themed Capcom game, Resident Evil.
Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Before the 7th entry, most of the protagonists were military or police officers, or in Claire's case, actually learned a few police moves from her older brother Chris. Not to mention, they were all attractive. Well, at least as attractive as you could be with the Resident Evil graphics on the PS1. Frank West, on the other hand, he's a 36-year-old wartime photojournalist with a typical dad bod that the AVGN would have had if all those rolling rocks were real. Frank also hasn't actually been in actual combat, and when you start the game, well, he can do barely anything noteworthy. Most people who would play this game obviously wouldn't be military or police trained people, they'd be the average folk. Frank West was supposed to be the average everyday Joe, someone who would pick up anything and everything he could to help fend off the near countless numbers of the undead. And while Frank is a fair bit more easy on the eyes with his final design, he still has that grit to him that you normally see in Western characters, and it actually worked to the game's advantage, as Frank West had a number of appearances in other games and is most definitely the mascot for the Dead Rising series. There was a lot of time and thought put into the design of Dead Rising, and it shows. But now, I think it's time we went to the actual game and talk about what made the game spectacular, especially for its time.
Fantastic.
What in the world?
Okay, so what's this game about? Well, you're Frank West, an investigative photojournalist out to get the latest scoop. This time, after hearing about riots in the town of Willamette, Colorado, Frank decides to sneak into the town during a lockdown via helicopter. He's got 3 days to uncover the mystery of the unexpected zombie outbreak, so he'll have to do what he can in order to get the big scoop. He's dropped off at the Willamette Parkview Mall, where the first person he meets is, funnily enough, the man who started the zombie outbreak, Carlito. As Frank begins to investigate the now fortified mall, he begins to take note of all the strange stuff going on. And because of a single old lady who was able to overpower grown men twice her size to get to her dog, the zombies break in. I guess that lady was just a little too much today. So it's up to Frank to discover the mysteries of the outbreak, the cause, save survivors, and get out of this hellscape within 72 hours. That's the basic gist of the story, and it's a pretty generic story when it comes to zombie media. Much like its inspiration, the Romero films, it has a focus on societal issues, like consumerism! Of course, if that was all the game was about, then it wouldn't really resonate with a lot of people. The game does touch on topics such as government cover-ups, seeing people break down in the face of traumatic events, and eventually, survivor's guilt. but there's a lot more going on with this game than the story would let on. This isn't to downplay the story, because there are some fond moments in the game which we'll get into a little bit, but it's really not what made the game great, at least not in my opinion. What made the game great was the gameplay. The gameplay was really unique for the time, and that would be because of the freedom that the game gives you. What do I mean by freedom? Basically, while there's a story going on with the game, you don't have to follow it super closely. There are survivors to save, but you don't need to save them. You can interact with the world in just any way you want. Sure, we're not talking about a game like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom level sandboxing here, but we're still given a decent sandbox with plenty to explore. And I'd argue it has such a unique flavor to it that it doesn't need to be like those games to stand on its own today.
I can't believe you've done this.
Fantastic!
Cigarettes after sex.
You have an entire mall where you can take whatever you'd like to use as a weapon to bash, slash, and slip up the zombies, including healing items. And to top off this Sunday with that thing that made it all work, you can throw pies at zombies! Oh yeah!
And I really do enjoy having a cigarette after sex kind of thing.
I mean, sure, they're not effective weapons, but they certainly do make the game funny. So funny I can't help but need a cigarette after playing it. But anyways, Dead Rising has this combination of hard gameplay but entertaining elements to it. When you start the game, you really feel how slow Frank can be. He doesn't have a lot of inventory slots, he's got the arm strength of a wet noodle, and it can be a real struggle to get around the zombies at times. It should also be noted that the game has no auto-save system. You need to manually go into the bathrooms and save your game. And with no checkpoints in the game, if you die, you have to go back to the last save point you had. If that wasn't intimidating enough, the biggest struggle will be time. Now, while I said you have freedom, I meant freedom of movement. There's nothing stopping you from avoiding the important stuff, but you see, time is an active element of gameplay. Everything in the game revolves around time, main quests, and even the bosses. And if you don't do a case file on time, the truth will disappear, and the story will have a bad ending. And the only way to get back to that is to load a previous save point or start over. Although, that second option may not be a bad thing to do, and that's because even if you get a game over, any levels and skills you acquire through your playthrough, they get carried over to your next one. These levels give you additional perks such as more health, better stats, new abilities, and that's not all. Speed, how far you can throw, and inventory can improve as you level up, getting up to level 50, where in that level you gain the ability to imitate zombies and pass off as them, and the previous knowledge that you had on your previous run. And sometimes, runs can be about 6 hours long, so the game offers a lot of replayability and experimentation. I'd almost say that the game is pretty much an arcade-like. And the skills you learn are, well, to be frank, impressive. Using the zombies as platforms, ripping their guts out with your bare hands, which you can also do on humans, pulling off some wrestling moves, and probably one of the most enjoyable is the roundhouse kick. And these skills are perfect for not only survival, but for helping survivors. Keep in mind that crowd control is your friend if you're trying to save people. Now, I said earlier you don't need to save survivors, and you really don't. But the game incentivizes you to do so, and it's tied into the level system. When you bring back a survivor to the safe room, you get a load of experience, or as the game calls it, PP. And you can have more than one survivor in your group at a time, so you can get a load of PP in a short time frame. Though, you can only have 8 in your group at a time. While I am singing a lot of praises of the game, there are some issues that I do need to bring up. But it's nothing to worry about too much, just... God damn it! Okay, yeah, survivors. A big issue in this game, which mainly lies in their dog water diarrhea AI. While they are good for getting experience, they have a lot of issues. They'll panic, they'll get stuck on things, and they will, for some reason, run into zombies just to get eaten. And then there's things like their animations, which will force them to stop moving, making them prime targets. Why not just slather some barbecue on your heads there, folks, for the zombies? And don't get me started on them if they have to cross any body of water. They'll get stuck in those damn things, and if they do, well, just sit back and watch the bloodbath because they're trying to get out. It's like watching the fattest Snorlax trying to swim his way out of the Pacific Ocean. It ain't happening! And I'm pretty sure some of these bastards will shoot Frank in the back. And hey, if you accidentally hit a survivor, there's a chance they'll defect, attacking Frank and running off. But they hit you? Well, tough luck, stupid! Goodbye, my beloved Pee-Pee! Thankfully, in subsequent additions to the series, the survivors became a lot more tolerable. But there's a reason why a lot of escort missions back in the time when Dead Rising came out have the reputation that they do, even if some of them weren't deserving of it. It just kinda sucks because there's an active reason to save survivors since it helps you get the big experience points and allows you to level up. But that's not the only way to break an anime character scouter. You can also level up when you get hundreds or thousands of kills, taking pictures, using special moves on zombies, or just messing around with items you find around them all. It's hard to do, but it's completely possible to get the maximum level in one playthrough by completing everything, doing the story missions, saving every survivor, killing the psychopaths, and all the while getting the actual ending. The original Dead Rising, even by today's standards, is a pretty impressive piece of gaming tech, due to the freedom it provides you and attention to details. Do you want an example? If you throw an item like cooking oil or other liquids, it causes a splash effect on the ground, and zombies will actually slip on the liquid. Throw a heavy item at any glass, it'll shatter, but if you throw a soft object, the windows won't break. And to remind you guys that this is a game made by Japan, the kind of Japan that made you take a picture with a high enough erotica score, Frank will get a nosebleed. Very anime of you, eh, Capcom? The game is peppered with a lot of little things like this that make it memorable, but there's another thing. There's the bosses, or as the game calls them,
the maniacs are tough survivors who
the psychopaths. People who are either paranoid, broken from the zombie outbreak, or are folks who are taking advantage of the situation. Each of the psychopaths is wholly unique with their designs, personas, movesets, and even their rewards. Weapons, vehicles, or shortcuts across them all, and for the first two, they respawn. So, say you take out probably the most iconic of the psychopaths of the game, Adam the Clown. A clown who dual-wields single-handed chainsaws, all the while juggling them. These chainsaws are arguably one of the best weapons in the entire game. And while you can fight Adam on the first night in the game, that doesn't mean he's an easy fight. This psychotic fruit basket of a clown has throwing knives, surprising agility, shooting balloons that can stun Frank, and of course, the chainsaws. He can be a challenging fight, but not an unfair one, since if you were to shoot the balloons he used to stun Frank with long-range weaponry, you can stun him all the same, or you can throw heavy objects at him, or you can even use the zombies to your advantage because the bosses themselves can be actually distracted by the zombies. After all, they're not working in tandem with the deadheads, they're just regular people with their own issues. On a side note, just to show the attention to detail, when you defeat Adam the Clown, there's a nearby bookstore you can go into next to his arena. Books can offer you perks if you just carry them in your inventory, and one of the books you can get is one that can increase the durability of the chainsaws that Adam drops, allowing you to have it for longer before it breaks. Oh, yeah, there's weapon degradation in the game. Meh. I feel like this is probably one of the better implementations of this feature in games. Not only do the weapons respawn when you enter a new area, but they're always in the same place. One notable item for a strong weapon is that apparently at a regular coffee place called the Colombian Roastmasters, which is a great place to get orange juice, a good healing item, you can just jump off the railing and onto an awning. And someone, I don't know who, left a great early weapon on this awning. A pretty good katana. You know,
Fold 1,000 times, tempered to perfect precision so it can cut through anything in existence. The ultimate symbol of power, able to cut an oncoming storm that is approaching!
or just something that can cleave a zombie in two. That works.
The cream of the crop.
Just thinking about how this damn thing got here is a mystery, but it'll always respawn there again and again and again. The gameplay loop is designed to really draw the players into it. Whether it be the level of freedom, or how there was actual thought put into the game's bosses and the world design, it can really work well together. But to me, there's always one aspect of Dead Rising that I always found made the game really stand out, especially from other zombie games.
Poopies, funny poopies, la 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 la.
You know, there's some truth to the idea that video games are perfect for humor. How often do you see Let's Players or streamers making fun of a game that takes itself way too seriously? Or even how often do you see a streamer having a literal mental breakdown over making a mistake in a speedrun? If you see someone streaming or Let's Playing a horror game, they'll immediately take the piss out of a game that has a monster that's supposed to be scary, but unfortunately falls flat, whether it be design or how it's implemented. This isn't anything new. It's been a thing since YouTubers were a thing, or if you want to go back to Dead Rising's contemporaries, more specifically Resident Evil, while there was some humor, that was more due to the cheesy voice acting.
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Jill sandwich.
And was more action schlock than anything that would definitely have added to the comedic aspects. But Dead Rising? Dead Rising is practically in a league of its own. You see, thanks to all the freedom that we talked about in the gameplay section, you can have a lot of fun with it. The kind of fun that makes it feel like a circus. Frank can mess with the zombies, the survivors, and the stuff inside the mall to the point that the comedy writes itself, because the player is the comedian. You can use a bowling ball to knock down the zombies, with Frank actually taking a stance to use it like a bowler would. You can put zombies in serve-bot heads. You can live out your midlife crisis by trying to be a Tony Hawk ripoff, or you can pretend you're the Street Fighter by doing a somersault kick. However, the biggest element for comedy comes from the costumes. Dead Rising is a comedic game, and it's shown with the clothing that you can have Frank wear. Dresses, kitty wear, his boxers, Mega Man, and a ton of other outfits that you can unlock for achievements. But the best part is that the costumes and clothes you wear are carried over into the cutscenes. Hell, in my original video on Dead Rising, Kaiser Trigger, the editor who made that video, did a hell of a lot of work on that, including playing through each of the games with the Servbot mask on at all times, just to have each cutscene play out with the Servbot mask. All the while, everyone, Frank and any protagonist included, is taking the story completely seriously, without making any mention of the ridiculous outfits. Just imagine if CG movies could allow people to go into menus and add different outfits and accessories to the characters, allowing them to turn scenes into this kind of comedy circus show, or serious depending on how they want to go about it. Dead Rising is a game where you can be a man in his 30s wearing a dress and riding a tricycle, all the while you have zombies chasing you. Or you can be a total clown while raincoat wearing Green Goblin masked cultists explode all around you. And for the rest of the series, this has been a continuous element, but in some cases it's more of a detriment. So when you look at something like Dead Rising 4, it's more of a parody of the entire series, and it kind of fails at that since it effectively makes a parody out of a satire. And it's kind of telling that a lot of people don't understand that there is a difference. I'll go more to Dead Rising 4 and how it fails as a parody when we get to that game, since we're focusing on the first game for this specific video. But to explain how Dead Rising is a satire, we need to look at the plot a little deeper. The entire reason why the zombie outbreak happens in Willamette is because a Latino town, Santa Cabeza, was destroyed by another zombie outbreak, caused by greedy corporations to create more beef to feed Americans. It wasn't because Americans were starving, but because Americans are demanding. It's part of the reason why the mall is used as a backdrop for the game. It represents a place of demand. This isn't groundbreaking, especially with zombie flicks. Shaun of the Dead had something like this when you saw shoppers looking like zombies. If you take the word bargains and drop the first A and G, you get brains. It's not the deepest of analysis, but it works to the whole element of satire, especially when it comes to the medium of games. One could easily see Dead Rising as a satirization of Resident Evil, since the Umbrella Corporation that pushes the events in the Resident Evil franchise, even to a cartoonish degree, satire uses humor, irony, or exaggeration to criticize and ridicule a person, group, or societal issue. Zombies being used as a means to poke fun at or even criticize consumerism or big government is an effective element, because the only thing that zombies do is consume things. And let's face it, this clip can be scarily accurate at times.
Don't ask questions.
Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
The satire of the game is that consumerism can be viewed as exploitative, gluttonous, and have a disdain for human life. The satire is tied into the story pretty well as the themes of the game. But here's how the satire really works well. Now, to make it clear, you can appreciate the whole idea of what Dead Rising is trying to say, that consumerism can lead to terrible things, and that the government can fuck right off for covering up the Santa Cabeza incident. However, you don't have to engage with it. The thing about satire is that if you make it just about the politics, you kill any and all nuance or ways to look at something. And Dead Rising knows this. It's why when you're talking to Carlito when he's about to die, he expresses his hatred for the American government and tells you his motivations for starting the Willamette outbreak. You can look like a friggin' idiot with the clothes you choose. The satire is there and you can engage with it, but it's up to you, the player, to decide to really involve yourself in it. Because most of the time, you're just in Dead Rising doing goofy stuff like this. thing about entertainment, regardless of its medium, is that you need to be able to make something entertaining. If you were to really look at Dead Rising completely serious, yes, you can see that it is a satire on consumerism, but does that make the game good? Or is it the gameplay? It can easily be both, and that's the thing about Dead Rising or any game that falls into its vein. People can take the satire in stride and just enjoy the game for what it is, because whether or not they engage with it, it's up to them. Just because someone prefers gameplay over satire or message of something, that doesn't mean they're incapable of understanding the satire. It just means that people can enjoy other aspects of a piece over it. And if you just view a piece of media for only its satire and message, then I personally believe that you're doing a disservice to the rest of the medium. You're Frank West, you've covered wars, and you're wearing a Servbot head. The first game, at the time of me writing the script and hopefully getting this video out, came out about 18 years ago at this point. It's a game that I really do enjoy playing. Granted, I have a preference due to the second game coming out on PlayStation, but for what Dead Rising was like in its first attempt, it was a damn fine one. Just don't play the Wii version. The Wii version is like Fight Club. You don't talk about the Wii version. Dead Rising has a lot of moving gears to it that, frankly speaking, were daunting. The sandbox, the funny mechanics, the characters of the game. Perfect. The fortune of replay value. All things that you should experience on your own. It's no wonder that Dead Rising was a home run for the Xbox 360. It can be a bit clunky by today's standards, but Dead Rising even to this day has a lot going for it and is a series that I do love. With one great exception. That game will have its day. Trust me, one day the bell shall toll for thee. But some of you may be wondering why I'm doing this series again, especially when I covered this series in a video with the same name. Well, aside from the fact that I want to talk about zombies again on the channel, I also felt that back in the day, I could have done better. When we look at things we created before, especially videos, you can't help but think, I made an editing mistake here. I could have gone more in depth, or in my case, God, my audio friggin' sucks. I still think my Dead Rising video still holds up, but there's a lot more that I could have done with it, especially when it came to talking about the first 3 games before the abomination known as Dead Rising 4 took over it. Because you all need to see. You need to see the roots of what really made Dead Rising a franchise I'm sure a lot of people will look back on with fond memories. This was to showcase how the 4th and final game in the franchise had truly royally screwed over the future of the series, which at the time of me writing this, it's been 8 years since that travesty came out. Anyways, next time, we'll be going to where the series, in my opinion, peaked. Dead Rising 2 and Off the Record. I'm MangaKamen, and remember, terror is reality, my friends. Goodbye.
Fantastic!